two former New York Times employees aren't taking it, one of whom was a former New York Times editor who resigned over the fallout from a 2020 op-ed, who is ripping the paper for not having his back and shutting out conservative voices to keep liberal subscribers happy. James Bennett was the opinion page editor who gave the green light for Senator Tom Cotton's op-ed titled "Send in the Troops," calling for a military response to the violent protests that erupted after George Floyd's murder. Just days after the op-ed was published, the Times attached an editor's note saying, quote, "After publication, this essay met strong criticism from many readers and many Times colleagues, prompting editors to review the piece. In the editing process, based on that review, we have concluded that the essay fell short of our standards and should not have been published." We could attach that note to pretty much 95% of the op-eds in the New York Times, but only the conservative ones get it. In a new interview, Bennett now says he was mistreated by colleagues, saying this: "My regret is that editor's note. My mistake there was trying to mollify people when push came to shove at the end. He, A.G. Sulzberger, set me on fire and threw me in the garbage and used my reverence for the institution against me. This is why I was so bewildered for so long after I had what felt like all my colleagues treating me like an incompetent fascist." Katrina, the point I think doesn't stun me is he was bewildered. I mean, we know this is how the left acts. It shouldn't have been so bewildering.
I mean, the whole concept to me, and this reminds me back of when I was selling real estate, and then, our boss, Donald Trump at the time, decided that he was going to run for president. And I remember a lot of my real estate clients were like, well, I can't necessarily, I was working for Trump at the time, and they said, we can't have his sign on our front lawn, but we love him. And then, so people were afraid to vocalize their true feelings. And it feels like you just can't be in the middle, right? You either have to be an extreme to the right or extreme to the left, and people don't feel that they can be authentic. And this goes back also to, this is what I tell, my nephews and my niece and my son, is I don't want them to mask who they really are. Tell me how you feel. I'm not going to hold it against you. And I think it's really important for the young people in this country to realize that they could be authentically themselves. And that's what the home is all about, feeling free and feeling, comfortable with yourself. And so, but nowadays you have to be so careful about what you say.
You do. Harris, there was another example, Barry Weiss, who resigned. She was a New York Times reporter. Senator Tim Scott, amid George Floyd, wanted to publish an op-ed, one that would have been great, a bridging op-ed about the Justice Act, which he was putting forward. Here's what Barry Weiss said happened at the Times. They deny it, but here's her claim.
There was a discussion about the piece and whether or not we should run it. And one colleague, a more senior colleague, said to a more junior colleague who was pushing for the piece, "Do you think the Republicans really care about minority rights?"
Wow.
And the more junior colleague said, "I think Tim Scott cares about minority rights." And then, and here's the pretty shocking part, the more senior colleague said, "Let's check with Senator Schumer before we run it."
The piece never ran in the New York Times.
So also not shocking, and I agree with Katrina on this, and I think you said it too, Kaylee, that the way that conservatives have been treated in legacy media, because that's what New York Times is, it doesn't shock me. It shouldn't shock anybody, but what it should do is really point to the issue that they're not doing their job. And their job is to make sure that anything on the right side of speech and anything on the left side of speech that is protected speech and not hate speech is the speech that we all speak, and it's protected by the Constitution. These are not threats. These are not things that are hate speech. So that should really be the line of delineation for what makes it into the paper, what makes it into coverage, and what does not. Anything else is political opinion. And let's be clear about that, because they're not being paid like a little extra cash on the side not to run something by Senator Tim Scott. And if they are, well, we got bigger problems. But it's most likely political. And there is no room for that, for the journalism that we say that we need. Now, if we want to rewrite it and make it all about what somebody thinks and somebody likes or doesn't like, then we can start there.
Yeah, and Brian, the Times says that they are that type of journalism. Both of these things happened in 2020, but in 2016, when they were so wrong about the election, they said, as we reflect on the momentous results, this is when Trump was elected, and the months of reporting and polling that preceded it, we aim to rededicate ourselves to the fundamental mission of the Times. That is to report America and to the world honestly, without fear or favor, striving always to understand and reflect all political perspectives, except Tom Cotton, except Tim Scott, except Republicans.
Turns out they didn't dedicate themselves to that, actually. Two things on this. One is, I was in Minneapolis at this time. We needed some good ideas. We needed some different ideas. We needed some debate on how to deal with what was going on. The fact that they shut that down was a loss for that state, the city of Minneapolis, and America.
So
but number two, liberals in the past, this is what you got to remember, liberals in the past actually defended the right for everybody to speak. I mean, we could have debate in this country. Even if you're a conservative, you disagree, William F. Buckley and Noam Chomsky, they would debate and they would talk in public about their ideas and wouldn't try to cancel. They'd try to get the better of each other. That's what we should be doing with the New York Times, with the debates in this country. That's what we've lost.
But they're not doing it, Emily. In fact, Bennett, who resigned, said that they think they're Mother Jones on steroids, which is like a hackery left-wing publication.
That's right. And digging into that statement a little further, he said that's what the subscribers expect. That the subscribers expect the New York Times to be Mother Jones on steroids, and therefore New York Times is catering to them because they saw an explosion of subscriptions in the wake of that progressive political left that has the money to subscribe. 100 million %.
We got problems.
I grew up in the Bay Area, and I grew up during a time, Brian, when I felt like I really benefited from that liberal hippie existence because all speech was absolutely celebrated. I really did see and was exposed to that progressive, every opinion is valued. And now I don't recognize home when I go back because it's 100% censored. And let me get this straight, you guys. The public, the free press is supposed to be the arm of the people, right?
Right.
And yet here's the New York Times that says one senator isn't good enough to be published. One senator doesn't meet the standards of rigorous publication. And yet let's call another senator before we publish something for his permission.
On the other side of the political
That's
aisle.
exactly
Let's
right.
get permission because they are complicit. And
That's
one
right.
might even say in collusion.
There you go.
Let's
All
get
for
Senator
money.
Schumer's permission to run Senator Scott's words.
That's right.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And look, they claim it didn't happen, but the op-ed never ran. Why? Give us an explanation.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.